that people are being held as hostages is ridiculous, and they've made no attempt to try and guarantee people freedom of movement, freedom from torture, any of the Geneva Conventions.
You speak of incentives. I mean, what does it really take as an intensive? I mean, just imagine people are trapped there in the war zone in the midst of a crossfire.
Let me put it to you.
It's just beyond having any incentives. It's just...
No, I agree completely. The word incentive was used ironically. The point is the incentive, if there was one, is to not be killed by chemical bombs and cluster bombs in the area. So that is what I suppose the government hopes is incentive on the one side.
Protection for the civilians trapped there.
Well, it's not exactly protection if you're tortured in camps and you're held without any sort of Geneva Convention rights that are accorded to human beings under normal circumstances. What the government is doing is introducing a two-tier society, very much like the Americans did, for example, pre their Civil War. Of course, you know, there's a constitutional right to the pursuit of freedom and freedom of movement and all of those things, but it doesn't apply to the Tamil people. That is why we say this is a war that is about race and that it is a genocidal war. I do want to clarify one point about the genocide point, that our position is not that this act alone is genocide. We think that it matches the Srebrenica definition of genocide, but we say that there has been a long-running, ongoing genocide. In fact, the very first act of non-violent ethnic cleansing was back in 1948, when a third of the Tamil people were deprived of citizenship. So the first step was done through laws, very much like the Nazis did. The Nazi genocide was carried out initially through legal mechanisms. The Jewish people were stripped of citizenship in Nazi Germany. So
let me come back to you in just a bit. I think we're drifting a little bit from the main theme. Now, another guest just joining us on the phone from Sri Lanka, from Kandy, is Mr. Kehelia Rambakwela. A warm welcome to you, Mr. Rambakwela. Now, we were discussing the latest situation in terms of the so-called defeat of the LTTE in your country. Now, does the fall and collapse of Kilinachi, basically the de facto capital of the rebels in late last year, necessarily mean the end of the separatist movements there?
Well, if I hear you right, I think asking me about the liberation operation that was carried out within the last few months. And
no, as a matter of fact, sir, Kehelia, I was asking you about if you believe, as the government claims, the end of the rebels is pretty near.
Yeah, that's right. That is, we have now restricted them to a 15 square kilometer area where we have we've created that situation where it's known as a no fire zone, where few of the terrorist Prabhakaran and then few are stuck there and holding the mass of people to almost on a hostage situation. That is where we are now.
Right. Now, let me come to you again, Hugo. Now, is it not true that underlying this military conflict that's been going on for a number of years is a major ethnic-based political problem? Now, how do you see that unfolding? I mean, if we suppose that the military defeat were to be true, how can the government, if there was a will to do that, really address that root cause of the Tamil political problem?
Well, I think that is a major problem, and I don't think there's going to be any easy solution to it. Both sides are very entrenched at the minute, and the history of the Sri Lankan government hasn't been very good. But before we just jump into the future, I don't think it should be assumed that the end is so immediate as you anticipate. And most importantly, I appreciate the British government position is that there are 200,000 people trapped, held hostage, and there is another population that is living happily under government control. I have to say, it's a shame there are no independent journalists there, but as a relatively experienced criminal practitioner, it's difficult to see how 200,000 people can be held hostage by a force the size of the Tamil Tigers. And without some sort of independent verification, it's difficult for fair-minded people to be convinced that these people really are being held hostage. And the suggestion is that the reason they are there is because the alternative, namely living under Sri Lankan government control, is even worse than where they are at the minute. And until the Sri Lankan government recognises that that and accepts that, and until the United Nations and the international community recognise that there is a real problem for the Sri Lankans, the way they are not treating the Tamils fairly, until that is all out in the open, and for example the LTTE should be removed as a proscribed organisation, because if you have a proscribed organisation then you can't have dialogue, and if you can't have dialogue you don't have peace. So the short-term answer is stop calling the LTTE terrorists, stop making them a proscribed organisation, and talk, and stop shelling the Tamil population.
Jen, do you agree with the gentleman that there is a chance that since there is no independent verification body there, no media outlets are allowed there basically, the truth of the matter might be somehow or somewhat concealed or mischaracterized, and if so, is there a chance that the proportions of the humanitarian dimensions of this crisis could be kind of blown up?
Well, no. What I do agree is that the truth as put to us by the government certainly is problematic, and if they had nothing to hide, they would allow the independent media in. But as a Tamil, I don't feel that the truth is problematic for me, because I do have Tamil media and I trust Tamil media as a British Tamil. So I have no issues with looking at Tamil media, and there are people reporting via the Tamil media every day from the war front at great cost to themselves. I'm disappointed in the international media, but that's a difficulty that we have. So we have to rely on the media we have, and I don't think the casualties are exaggerated at all, because we have seen the photos, we have seen the evidence, we've got reports from doctors, from government agents, from every kind of Tamil professional in the area, and we have those reports. One of the points that I would want to make about the international community is that I think that to date they have in fact helped this conflict. They have not been strong enough, and to some extent the Tamil people are being punished, very much like the Palestinian people are being punished for electing Hamas. The Tamil people have chosen to stay in this area. They moved to the Vanni region in 1995 when the government occupied Jaffna, so they've been displaced once. They chose to move to the areas that they're in, and they're effectively being left alone and punished for staying there with the LTTE. The southern press is calling them unwanted. I get very worried when I hear that word, because to me it signifies something genocidal. When you say that 200,000 people are unwanted, it's problematic. And when the government says that there are only 70,000 people or 40,000 people left, and we know better, we know the original population was 330,000 people, we start wondering what is meant to happen to those missing people. They're already being wiped off in terms of identity. We say there are 330,000 to start with. The government says there's 40 to 60,000 now. Well, what happened to the other 270,000? They're not all in these camps. We know that for sure.
Okay.
So obviously they're either...
On that note, let me go to Candy and to Kehelia. Kehelia, now you heard the other guest speaking of the situation. Now the rebels, the Tigers, have said that they are open to a negotiated truce with the government, but on no circumstances will they lay down their arms. Now, does this signify strength on their behalf or some sort of weakness? I guess we have a problem with the audio line. So back to you, Hugo. Why don't you take a crack at that? If you heard the question.
Well, if you could just repeat the main point again quickly.
Well, the point was that the rebels have said that they're willing to negotiate a truce, a temporary one, possibly with the government, but they will not lay down their arms. Now, does this mean that they're in a stronger position as already perceived by the government, or is it the other way around?
Well, I'm not sure whether they're stronger or weaker. I mean, I think the question of laying down arms is something that we dealt with in Northern Ireland, and it is something that an army that has fought a resistance war for a long time, such as, and certainly in a more militarized form than the Irish, than the IRA, is always going to be reluctant to lay down its weapons. That's not usually part of a ceasefire. And the trouble is that the demands on both sides are very extreme, even in the long term. So secessionism, for example, is something which would have to be debated, and is not debatable at the minute. But in the short term, of course, the Sri Lankan government feel that a ceasefire will militarily